Bo-Katan looked at Djarin with amusement, but she wouldn't deny him the chance to redeem her own failure. The former owner of the Darksaber ushered her success out of her castle, and Djarin travelled to the abandoned Mandalore. When he approached the planet, both the folded IG-12 and R5-D4 were beeping furiously as they sensed their magnetic fields being disturbed. During the Great Purge of Mandalore, the Empire had sent a message to Bo-Katan and the Mandalorians, annihilating everything in its path. The main culprits have been the TIE surface assault bombers, which are primarily tasked with leading attacks on buildings. With their uniquely designed dual pods, they were able to both carry the pilot and have a spare chamber for munitions, from concussion missiles to proton torpedoes, but on the night of 1,000 Tears, they carried fusion bombs. Such was the effect of these fusion bombs, they turned the surface into a murky green material known as trinitite, but they also interrupted the magnetic field in the atmosphere. As a result, Djarin now found himself annoyed by his two droids, so when he landed on the scorched surface, he dispatched them to test the atmosphere. Whilst he waited for the droids, the Mandalorian felt uncomfortable at the silence, and he also couldn't shake the feeling that he needed Grogu for this mission. With the help of IG-12, R5-D4 was able to negotiate the sentient Alamites, and rolled back to the ship. The astromech confirmed what Bo-Katan had told him, and there was no curse on Mandalore. Stepping outside of the comfort of his M1 starfighter, Djarin cautiously stepped foot on the surface, and with his IB-94 blaster pistol in hand, he scoured the cave from side to side. The victims of IG-12 were scattered across the floor, but when Djarin approached the remains of the Civic Center, he would now be alone. The abandoned city was silent, apart from the jetpack of the Mandalorian, who descended to the bottom of the area. As the water dripped from the eroding pipes, Djarin could barely see more than a meter in front of him, his only light source being a small helmet light. He would soon notice the surface of the floor change, from the remains and debris of the battle to a fine ash-like substance, and in amongst it would be an old Mandalorian helmet. Djarin dug down and brushed off the dust to gaze the helmet, but with his vision limited and the audio sensors in his helmet distorted, he was taken by surprise when a spider tank leapt from the ground. The droid used one of its mechanical limbs to snatch the Mandalorian, and after a struggle, the scavenger droid within the tank placed Djarin in a cage. Desperately trying to find a signal through his helmet, the magnetic interference was blocking all of his attempts, and one by one, his armor was being removed. Blood started to drip from his skin as the droid snatched its claws across him, and Djarin's life was starting to fade. Back on the surface, IG-12 was conversing in droid speak with R5-D4, and the assassin droid was beginning to question the decision of his master to go alone. The sight of the drop below had triggered a threat warning in IG-12, but his new programming to care for Djarin was fighting his original role of an assassin. Against the furious R5-D4, IG-12 took a leap of faith. The mechanical limbs clattered into every pipe and framework on its way down, until the droid grasped a girder about halfway down from its destination. Even with its damage-resistant armor, the fall had dented and wounded the droid, but IG-12 cleverly used his utility belt to fix the dents, before falling for a final time. Thanks to the water softening the ground, IG-12 was able to survive the final impact, and as the assassin droid made minor repairs, his sensors alerted him. A number of heat signatures flashed across its vision, and as it took a step into new terrain, IG-12 saw Djarin in a cage. With a plasma cutter in its claw, IG-12 cut through the metal bars of the cage, and the Mandalorian soon dropped to the floor. IG-12 used some of its Bacta spray to heal his wounds, but soon the cyborg returned. The assassin droid switched from caring to lethal in a flash, and with two blaster rifles, he tried to fire the cyborg into dust. The cyborg's armor and agility made it a difficult target, so IG-12 moved swiftly to pick up the fallen Darksaber, then violently dissected the cyborg. As the circuitry of the cyborg fizzled out, IG-12 collected the fallen Beskar armor of his master and placed it back onto him. Having heard about Djarin's mission to redeem himself, IG-12 tried to use its sensors to scan for any water, but it was too far away. If he wanted to help with his master's mission, he would have to do it the human way. IG-12 had little knowledge of what the mines looked like, so did what he was programmed to do, and waited for his master to awaken. As the night settled on the outside, the battered and bruised Djarin stuttered into life. The Mandalorian thanked IG-12 for saving his life, but he also had no clue how to get to the mines. To complete his mission, they decided they had no other choice but to blast their way to the mines. With a combination of whistling birds and detonators, the already ruined civic centre is reduced into more dust, but they managed to create gaps in the ceiling to improve visibility. After the night had passed and dawn broke through the cracks, Djarin and his droid finally spotted an entrance. A tall structure with a distinct gap through the middle brought hope to the weakened Mandalorian, and his redemption was within reach. The duo entered the narrow opening and they walked through the cave, the light disappearing with every step, until they were left with Djarin's helmet light again. But before they lost hope again, the Mandalorian found what he had been looking for. With a sprint that defied his lack of energy, he walked through a trapezoidal archway to find the living waters. IG-12 immediately asked his master to stop, and as the assassin droid walked forward, its sensors detected something sentient was in the water. Djarin walked to the sign next to the shore, and it said that Mandalore the Great had been able to defeat and tame the mythosaur. As he turned back to look at the water, the Mandalorian knew that his mission had become more than just becoming a redeemed Mandalorian. Djarin paced the perimeter of the water, wondering if the legend of the mythosaur was really true, and how the Mandalorians ever tamed such a beast. In a moment of realization, Djarin and IG-12 had the same idea, and wielding their detonators, they knew their best chance was to summon the monster. The detonators were thrown both into the water, and the wall at the back of the cave, and the area started to crumble. Djarin and IG-12 retreated to the archway, as debris fell around them until all fell silent. The Mandalorian took cautious steps back to the water when he was greeted by an almighty roar that shook the already damaged cavern to its foundations. Igniting his darksaber, Djarin moved to slice the rising mythosaur to pieces, but at the sight of his weapon, the roar became a low growl. IG-12 kept his blasters equipped whilst Djarin slowly approached the 50-foot beast and took steps into the water. He swore on his name and those of the ancestors that he would walk the way of the Mandalore, and the words of the creed would be forged into his heart. Removing a small cylinder from his belt, he took a sample of the living waters as proof for when he returned to the covert, and he looked at the scales of the mythosaur's sternum. Against the advice of IG-12, the redeemed Mandalorian used his jetpack and climbed onto the back of the mythosaur. The reluctant assassin droid was dragged to the mount of the mythosaur, and the once dormant beast saw light again. The Mandalorian had grown up hearing about the legend of the Torm and the conquest of Mandalore I, and he now followed in their footsteps. The roof collapsed into the waters as the trio bulldozed and climbed their way back to the surface, and Djarin decided to shelter the mythosaur in a nearby cave surrounded by trinitite. With R5-D4 returning to the surface, Djarin folded IG-12 and together they travelled out of Mandalore and back to the covert. The M1 starfighter touched down onto the shore and Djarin emerged alone to face Paz Vizsla. The skeptical Mandalorian claimed Djarin was an apostate, but the Redeemer was prepared, and with the cylinder he had retrieved, he is led to the armourer. Unscrewing the lid, the droplets of the living waters turned a bold blue, and Djarin had achieved his first mission of becoming a Mandalorian again. Igniting his darksaber, he held it aloft and claimed that he wanted to take over Mandalore. Murmurs of mixed approval echoed in the armory, and Vizsla doubted if Djarin had the resources, given their previous failure in the Night of 1,000 Tears. Reaching into his pocket, he showed them the scale of the mythosaur and guided them outside to his ship, where he summoned R5-D4. The astromech activated its holoprojector and showed the Mandalorians the army on Mechis 3, and finally the Mandalorians had been convinced. It was time to take over Mandalore again. That is it for part 2 of this What If. If you'd like to see a part 3 or any other What If, feel free to leave your suggestions in the comments below. Thank you for watching and see you next time.